Alrighty then, so I just saw Ant-Man and the Wasp, and wow, this movie left a lot to be desired. As always, when I'm reviewing a sequel or a remake, I like to speak briefly about the original films that came before. You know what, I actually remember being pleasantly surprised walking out of the theater for the first Ant-Man. In particular, I remember enjoying the relatively grounded plot. I thought Paul Rudd was pretty good in the role, and as always with Marvel movies, I think it found success when it wasn't taking itself all that seriously. Now, when I say that I was pleasantly surprised, that's not necessarily me saying that I thought it was a good movie, as much as it means I thought it was enjoyable and entertaining. Say what you will about Marvel as a whole, but I thought Ant-Man 1 was a charming and quaint movie that showed a side of the MCU that a lot of us weren't used to. It was low-key, it was goofy, and I actually kinda liked how it didn't really have anything to do with the other Marvel movies. With that being said, I'd probably give Ant-Man 1 a 5 out of 10, and would only really recommend it to people who are really devoted to the MCU. Now, about this movie, I'm just gonna say it, this movie left a whole lot to be desired. And please understand that I'm judging this movie as an individual film and not how it stacks up to the other Marvel movies. Like, of course, this movie isn't nearly as good as Infinity War, but that's not the reason why I didn't like it. This movie could have been released months before Infinity War, and I can say with confidence that I would feel the same exact way about it. Anyways, let's talk about the things I liked about the movie. Much like everybody else, I like Paul Rudd as Ant-Man. I think that he's very natural at being your typical lovable oaf, and he's definitely a solid choice in the role. And although I think he's good, I guess I wouldn't really say that I think he's the best man for the job. Like, I'm no casting director, and I'm just throwing names out here, but I could see Chris Pine or maybe even Channing Tatum do this role just as well as Rudd. Once again, I do like him as Ant-Man, but he's just not that amazing to me. Similarly so, I think Evangeline Lilly also did a pretty good job, but much like Paul Rudd, I don't think she's that great as the Wasp. Like, seriously, I can think of so many other actresses that could play this part just as good, if not better than her. And to be totally fair, they did not give her a lot of great material in this movie, so I think a lot of the blame could be pinned on the script. Walton Goggins as the minor villain was actually rather fun to watch. Although I didn't expect to see him in this movie, I thought his performance really worked. Once again, I appreciate how comparatively small scale this film is compared to the huge Marvel films we've been getting the last few months. When you've had movies like Thor Ragnarok, Black Panther, and Infinity War all coming out within the last year, it's actually really quaint to see a Marvel movie that doesn't leave the city that it starts in. Cool, now let's talk about what this movie could have done better. First things first, I thought this movie was terribly unfunny. And I find this to be particularly disappointing because I actually feel like Marvel has been getting better with their humor in recent films, but this movie only made me chuckle once. Michael Peña's character is probably considered the comic relief in this movie, and honestly, I would have enjoyed this movie a lot more if he was removed entirely. Every single joke out of his mouth sounded as if a 13-year-old boy wrote it, and as a matter of fact, I kind of feel like this entire film was as if a 13-year-old boy wrote it. And please understand, I'm not mad in the slightest that this movie wanted to be funny. If you're asking me, I think Marvel movies are at their best when their tones are lighter and they're not afraid to be goofy. But when it comes to this film, every joke feels so desperate and forced. Like, oh my gosh, Michael Peña's character is talking fast and can only tell the truth. Oh my gosh, this is such comedy. Anyways, there's only so many ways you can explain why something isn't funny, so please just trust me when I say that this movie was not funny. I honestly feel like I could have edited this movie better than whoever did it. There are so many strange and out-of-place editing choices in this movie. Multiple times throughout this film, I found myself asking, why did I have to see him smile right there? Or why do you keep showing me this? And you know what, in good movies, weird editing can sometimes lead to a payoff later on in the film, but surprise, this was not a good movie, and all the weird editing was just because they hired a horrible editor. Also, the directing was so basic and stock standard in this movie. You know what? This movie feels like Deadpool 1 in more ways than one. Of course, there are similarities between Ant-Man and Deadpool as characters, but these movies feel so similar because of how low effort everything feels. Whenever you see two characters speaking to each other, you really only see like 2 to 3 camera angles, and none of them have any sort of dynamic filmmaking to them. Seriously, they just put cameras on tripods and told people to act. It's really frustrating. And as an extension of this, I gotta say that the original Ant-Man did a lot better of a job at showcasing what you can do with his powers visually. There were some clever moments of action in Ant-Man 1 that I wasn't expecting, and I was looking forward to see what they would do with that in this movie, and the short answer is not much. Frankly, the only cool action moments in this movie are shown in the trailer, so if you're looking forward to seeing some cool action moments in this film, you've already seen them. And despite all of these things that bring this movie down already, I feel like the most disappointing aspect of Ant-Man and the Wasp is how generic and lazy the plot is. I saw this movie yesterday, and I honestly could not be able to explain to you what happens throughout the entire story. And I promise you, that's not because I wasn't paying attention, it's simply because of how little effort they put into the script. Not only that, I promise you that you've already seen every single plot point to this movie at least 10 times. Like, how can I be expected to care about a story when I've already seen all of these things happen on screen so many times before? Cool, so overall, I would actually say that Ant-Man and the Wasp was a bad movie that could have been decent had it had some competent writers. Just based on this review, my biggest issues with the movie were the jokes and the plot, two aspects of the film that are directly related to the script and the screenwriters. Ultimately, I would not recommend this movie, and I'm just gonna say it right here and now, don't waste your time and your money, and I am going to give this movie a 4 out of 10.